So, good afternoon. My name is Patricia Wyrick. I am the Rural Forestry Program Coordinator for the South Dakota Department of Ag and Natural Resources. We like to shorten it to DANR. I'm very appreciative of Mr. Tanner Clausen with the South Dakota Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources Watershed Protection Team to present today. But before we start, I have a few housekeeping items that need to be discussed. Today's workshop will be recorded, with the recordings being placed on the DANR's YouTube channel for public viewing once it is reviewed and approved by DANR Technical Support Team. DANR is an equal opportunity provider and wants to encourage participation. However, if you would not like to be part of the live recording, an email with the recordings once they're uploaded onto the channel will be sent to everyone who registered for this webinar. All microphones and videos have been turned off, and due to bandwidth concerns, we request that they stay off during the presentation. At the end of the presentation, we'll be taking questions. All questions will be placed in the chat box, or you can raise your hand and turn on your microphone. So with that, Tanner, please take it away.
All right, let's share my screen here and then I'll get started. All right, can you guys all see that?
Yes.
All righty. So like Patricia said, I'm here to talk about the South Dakota Riparian Buffer Initiative. It's a fairly new program. We've kind of revamped it as of lately again, so got some new information today, and yeah, so I guess as far as what's on the front page here, or the front slide, is this is kind of what we're looking for in a buffer. So the picture on the left there is a picture that the landowner had it. So same landowner both times, I guess I should say, and he was just grazing cows on there and using it as pretty much his summer pasture. And he actually got into the program. It's called SRAM, which is over here in the Big Sioux watershed, and put it in there, which is a buffer program that doesn't allow grazing for the summer months or the recreational time of year. And on the picture on the right there, this is just after 1 or 2 years is all, and that land healed itself pretty good, where you can see you have the vegetation on the edge of the water, which would be the buffer, and then you have vegetation within the water too. So that's helping both overland runoff as well as filtering some nutrients out that are and pollutants potentially that are in the water or that got into the water already. So in order to qualify for RBI, we have a couple water quality standards, and the biggest one would be the stream must be on the 745103 list, which that's just a list of water bodies that are designated beneficial uses in the state of South Dakota. Or the county commissioners can approve the water body to be included on the property tax relief, and that also qualifies it for the RBI project. So the buffer has to be a minimum of 50 feet wide with a max average of 120 feet wide, and that's both sides of the stream. So if you own both sides of the stream, you'd technically get 240 feet worth of buffer. And that max average, it's kind of hard to explain without showing a diagram, but what we do is we draw a line on the stream or along the stream the whole way to where where your property boundary goes. And then we just do 120 foot buffer. So we're just working on one side of the stream here, we'll say. And say it gives us 3 acres. So we know we have 3 acres to work with that we're eligible to pay on or able to pay on. And so in some spots you could have a minimum of 50, or say it's 60, 70 feet up to your property boundary. And then in other spots, it could be 150 or maybe even 180. Basically, the max average just gives us the ability to square off with fences and whatnot, just to make it a little bit more user friendly. So we're not having to move fences around, or you don't just have, a couple acres or an acre just sitting idle. That way we're able to hopefully take in the whole pasture in some scenarios. Or if you wanted to put a fence in, it makes it a little bit easier where you're not having to follow the contour of the stream. You can, make square corners and whatnot. It makes the fencing cheaper and really more user friendly. So the landowner must have existing perennial vegetation at all times, or or to start the project, or they must plant perennial vegetation. And I'll get into the kind of the cost share of stuff a little bit later. But it may not be grazed between May 1st and September 30th, which that's the recreational time of year, as I was saying just a little bit ago. And that's when people are out, boating, swimming, just playing around in the water. And that's when we're also out sampling. It may not be hayed or mowed between May 1st and August 1st. And then August 1st date is since we teamed up with GFB, they're kind of helping us with this project and Pheasants Forever. So that's for the nesting birds. That way they have a chance to nest and then raise their clutch. There must be a minimum of 4 inches of vegetation at all times for basically the health of the buffer, to prevent erosion, and to keep from overutilizing the ground. So basically, they say a good rule of thumb is if there's 4 inches above ground, there's roughly 4 inches below ground of roots. So that's for the health of the buffer and just to try to keep those plants healthy to hold that soil in place from eroding. But those eligible acres will be enrolled in the RBI program for 10 years, and that contract will be held between the landowner and the state of South Dakota. Well, the water quality and wildlife benefits. We'll start with we'll start with the water quality benefits, and our main concern is the filter and slow down runoff. So runoff can contain nutrients, sediment, animal waste, or chemicals, whether that be from lawns or agricultural grounds, which can be cropland and pasture land. In your guys' case, mostly pasture land and forest. So we like to slow that down, and by doing that, it can filter out some of them sediments, and sediments typically carry nutrients with them. Or if you're grazing cattle, that could filter out some of that fecal matter before getting to the stream. With the bank stabilization, I kind of just hit on that in the last slide, but yeah, just basically the wind and water erosion that can happen on top of the soil, but yet you have that soil structure in the ground that can help hold during flood events from tearing that vegetation out and starting to erode the banks. You can kind of see back in here, this is actually an SRAM that went in near Sioux Falls. Oh, it's probably 5 years ago now. Can you guys see my cursor here? Yep, there it is. So right in this area, it was really, since it's an outside turn, it was kind of coming around that bend and eating this bank away pretty good. But once they put it in, they got the cattle off and it got a chance to heal itself. It actually healed itself quite nicely. And that's whole, the grass is awesome there. Granted, this guy only hays it, so it never gets touched anymore, at least for the next, probably 5 years. But yeah, that's healed itself well. It's held up during some flood events. We've had some pretty crazy flood events over here, at least in the last few years, and it's held up. So it's kind of a good test to show how buffers can help on the landscape. And then lastly, on this slide, for the habitat, they can, as you can see, kind of in this on my picture behind the slides, there's habitat that's right along the water. So you have some aquatic habitat there, and then also the terrestrial habitat for, like I said, the nesting birds and such. So the benefits for the landowners, there's actually probably more benefits in this, but some of the benefits are vegetation can still be hayed or mowed. So that way the landowners can still utilize the ground. It doesn't just have to sit idle. We put it into a program, you're still getting a payment, but yet here you can still use it too. So you're still getting that utilization of the ground. There's cost share available, which can help increase the infrastructure on that ground. I hit on the bank stabilization already. And then there's also 50% tax reduction on these acres, as well as incentive payments for the acres that will be enrolled into the program. So I'll kind of go over the priority areas just quickly. So this is just a statewide priority area, our priority map. And those blue line streams are those ARSD streams that I had talked about on my first slide. So those will be they'll be listed on our website too. So if you actually go back to this presentation, it's a ARSD 745103 list, and then you can actually pick which watershed you're in and figure out if your stream's on there, or you can just get a hold of me and I can let you know if you guys are eligible or not. But this is This is a list of the streams that are eligible for RBI. Give you guys a second just to look over it. All right, so RBI incentives, which this is where I was talking about the cost share. So the rental payments will be based on 100% of the county CRP rental rate for crop and pasture land. So the pasture land is just the grassland CRP rate. And the cropland to be CP21, I believe that's correct. It's like filter strips, I think. Those are the NRCS practices. But yeah, cost share will be available on those enrolled acres. So it'll be 100% cost share for fence materials. And then the landowner would be um, responsible for getting that installed or paying someone to install it. 100% cost share for grass seed, and then the same as the fence, landowner's either got to plant it himself or hire a conservation district or somebody that has a drill to plant it. And in most areas, that's really, the grass seed comes into play when we're doing crop, putting crop fields back into buffer. Otherwise, I was explaining the background of my PowerPoint here. That one we didn't seed, we didn't put any grass seed down, and it was actually pretty bare. I wish I had a before picture, but I guess on the very first slide, my introduction slide, that one we didn't put any grass seed on either. That one just all came back from the seed bank that was there. So basically, that only comes into play if you're doing cropland. But then there's also 75% cost share for alternative water, and that can be whether you wanted to run a solar pump from the creek out to your cows, so you can move a tank around. If you're rotational grazing your cows, or if you want to do a permanent structure and hooking up to rural water. Otherwise, yeah, you could do wells. There's kind of a bunch of different options that you can do, that just kind of depending on whatever works for the landowner in their situation. The payments, so RBI payments for the acre payment, it'll be one upfront payment in year one, and then for the exclusion fence, alternative water, and grass seed payments, those payments will be made when the practices are installed. And I guess I should back up here. So the fencing materials, those would just be for the exclusion fence. That's not perimeter fence or anything. That's basically just the fence that's excluding the cattle from getting to that water body. I'd like to take a second for you guys just to look over our partner list here. Without partners, it'd be pretty difficult to run a successful project. So let's give you guys a second here and you can read through that. And at the bottom of this slide, we have the financial partners. So the state of South Dakota, the legislators gave us $3 million with House Bill 1256, which that money is all designated from the Big Sioux or just for the Big Sioux watershed. But when we started that, we thought, well, it'd be nice to be able to run this program at least statewide. So we went in and we applied for some ARPA funding, which is American Rescue Plan Act funds, and we got $1 million there to do statewide projects, so outside of the Big Sioux. So that was kind of nice. That way it's open all across the state of South Dakota now. All right, so how we monitor, we run Step L, which is, I guess Step L is an Excel based model that we put in, or that we put like acres, cows, number of cows and all that jazz in there, and it just spits out a load reduction in nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment for us on those enrolled acres. And we use that for our watershed projects across the state as well. So we're planning on using that for this project. That's a pretty good job spitting out load reductions for us, and then we'll report those back to where we got our funding from, just to kind of show like how we're doing, what bang for our buck we're getting in those, for each scenario and stuff. And then as far as the existing stream monitoring, I guess the watershed protection program has gauges kind of spread out all across the state, and we've actually been installing a few new ones out in the hills as of lately. So we'll be using those as far as where we're doing sampling. And right now, I guess we have the rotating basin project going on out in the hills, so they're taking a bunch of samples that way too. So be kind of a good baseline of where our samples are at, and then if we get some buffers to go in, if they're helping, if those buffers can actually show that they're helping, on certain creeks and whatnot, if we're making an impact. So we're going to continue using those monitoring sites since they're already laid out for us, and then also be doing some periodic field checks, taking before pictures, and then also coming back taking some after pictures, just to show like how the land will heal itself and how well those buffers are holding up over time. So with that, I can answer any questions, and then I guess if you guys do want more information, you can also go to our website, which is down at the bottom of this slide here, and there's kind of a whole list of info on that. So my contact information, I should have that on here, but I don't. Sure, if you reach out to Patricia, she can send you my way too. Otherwise, I know the Pheasants Forever staff and GFP staff should be aware of this project, and they should be able to send you my way too. Otherwise, I know some of my information is on the fact sheets and whatnot on this website, so you can get it that way as well. But with that, I'll take any questions you guys have.
So Tanner, I have one for you, because
Right.
your examples are all on cropland and then switching over and cattle. So one thing that I had asked in previous times that I'm not sure of is, hopefully you can see this.
Yep.
So if you have a property like this and the riparian is actually doing fairly well, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's working. Tax incentives to encourage this landowner to keep the property, well, and especially like this landowner here, to keep the cattle out of the riparian buffer. Is there anything tax wise or assessors wise that they help with that, or does RBI help this landowner at all since they don't currently run cattle?
Yeah, so we actually you don't have to run cattle necessarily. I just use that as an example because most people do, at least on this side of the state. So maybe I should mention that. Yeah, you don't have to have any cattle on the stream, but so you just can't graze the cow. So if you wanted someone to, I don't know, graze that buffer, you would have to wait till after that September 30th. But otherwise, yeah, that if they didn't have cattle or anything, they'd still be eligible for RBI.
Because that's is, when you end up with fairly working riparian areas,
Yep.
like this one here, yes, it could. This is French Creek, which I believe is on your list too.
Yep,
Like
it is.
this could do with some rehabilitation in assessing, because it's not as healthy of a riparian area as the other one was. But I looked at the website and it says it specifically talks about pasture and cropland. So
Yep. So I guess as far as forest land would fall under pasture land is how
okay.
we would handle that. Yep. So basically on that last picture you showed, we just have to have, if they want to do the minimum buffer, just a minimum of 50 feet, and then they wouldn't be able to hay it till after August 1st. But other than that, at least the buffer portion. And after that, then they could hay it if they wanted to. So yeah, people that don't have cattle, that's where the haying option's kind of nice, or they can either hay it themselves or have someone come hay it if they don't want to put a fence up. Not everybody wants to have cattle running across their ground, so that's kind of a nice option for some people.
Well, and I know for some of the people that I talk to, one of the things that I've had the gigantic question mark about is the tax incentive. Like, how do they
Mhm.
go about that? What does that entail? And in the West, that's actually a bigger interest right now, is what does
Okay.
that all entail? So if you know any more about that, please elaborate. If not,
I'm not real sharp on the whole tax incentive. I do know that they switched it from having to apply every year to you only have to apply every 10 years. So the nice thing would be is if you signed up for RBI, it's a 10-year contract. Well, so is your tax incentive. So they'd both go kind of hand in hand for the tax incentive with your RBI contract. But I would have to ask somebody exactly how that works and exactly how the sign up process works for the tax incentive anyway.
I would love to know more about that,
Okay.
myself. And some of the people that have talked to me, I think, are very interested in that. And if you have like that first area, the very first part, because let's say we have the property on the left side versus the right, which is a campground. Sorry, I'm using Google Earth rather than my pictures. But if that landowner was interested in RBI and had a healthy forest, they need to get a hold of you and work on a contract and all of that. Even though they're not physically having to plant anything or do rehab work necessarily.
Yep. Yep. So pretty much everything, at least if it's along the or along one of the streams that's eligible, you're pretty much eligible for this program. It's just you have to meet the minimum buffer requirement or the maximum, I guess, whichever case you'd want to go. And then let's see. Yeah, as long as you're going to stay within the grazing and haying requirements, you'd be good to go. There's really no prerequisite of having to have cattle or having to crop it previously or anything like that.
So those were the questions that I had, and I'm gonna stop the recording just in case someone wants to. Wait a second. Let me see. Okay, so the question that I had is, I think Box Elder Creek is part of the program. I'm unclear if the buffer can be mowed or unmowed non-grazed ground in the tree farm. So I think what this question is getting at is if you have this property through the RBI system, Tanner, the mowed area would need to remain unmowed until a certain date,
Yeah, so that whole buffer would have to stay unmowed until August 1st, and then you could mow it.
which would be 50 feet from the determined bank, correct?
Yep. So essentially, like we like to call it bank full, which, depending on whether you or I or whoever goes out there might be a little bit different. So basically, like if you're looking at this picture, you can kind of, this is pretty defined where you see where the bank is at least. But sometimes it's where the vegetation changes. So you kind of go from aquatic vegetation to terrestrial vegetation. That's sometimes a line if it's not quite as defined, but like this right here, it'd be right where, I mean, pretty much the edge of the water. You can pretty much see the edge of the bank. That's self-explanatory. That's an easy one. But yeah, we just go from the edge of that 50 foot out, and that's where you would have to put your, or to stop mowing at least till August 1st. And yes, to answer the question about box elder, I believe that one is on there. I'm actually looking it up here real quick just to give them a definite answer. Any other questions?
There seems to be one working on it at the moment. So once you get your answer on Box
All right.
Elder, we'll see if that one's they're typing.
Yes, box elder is on there. It looks like all the way, yeah, to middle fork box elder. Box elder is at least all the segments up to section 16 at township 2N and range 6E is, so I mean, I'm pretty sure that's about all box elder. There's quite a few of them listed on here. A lot of box elder tributaries are on there too. So
You get a thumbs up from that one.
perfect.